Allora, mi imbarazza un po' parlare di Cassiodoro alla scuola normale, la casa non solo di Andrea Giardina, ma anche di Arnaldo Momigliano, due studiosi che hanno fatto contributi molto importanti. Io vorrei sapere a chi sto parlando. Siete grandi studiosi che avete già studiato Cassiodoro per lunghi anni o siete totalmente innocenti e non avete letto neanche una parola? Chi non conosce Cassiodoro? Allora, tutti conoscono almeno un po'. Che vuol dire che non devo spiegare tutto? Allora, vado avanti, è colpa vostra se dico le cose che avrei dovuto spiegare. Quello che forse devo spiegare è come mai io sto lavorando un po' su Cassiodoro. E questo in connessione con un progetto miracolosamente finanziato dall'Europa. Deve essere una diapositiva, forse alla fine ci sarà, di ringraziamenti alla ERC. Ma questo non è semplicemente formale. Io sento, sai come stiamo in Inghilterra? Cioè, non sappiamo neanche noi come stiamo in Inghilterra. È una battaglia lunga e estremamente noiosa, ma noi di Cambridge almeno siamo convinti meglio stare insieme con il resto dell'Europa e fare un progetto finanziato da loro è una cosa che ti permette di fare le cose inconcepibili prima. E io avevo proposto questo tema dell'impatto della città antica, l'impatto ovviamente dopo l'antichità. Ho messo insieme un bel gruppo di 6, 7, 8 persone che è molto interdisciplinare. C'è un archeologo che lavora sulla Spagna visigotica, c'è uno storico medievale che lavora su Carlo Magno, c'è una turca che lavora sull'architettura bizantina e ottomana e così via. Allora siamo un gruppo molto misti e ho dovuto ricalcolare il mio contributo personale, perché all'inizio sognavo di tornare a Roma come tema. E poi ho capito che gli altri, c'erano tante cose dell'antichità che non sapevano e io ho dovuto spiegare un po' che cos'è questa città antica che può avere un impatto sul futuro. E così mi sono trovato lavorando nel periodo della tarda antichità e con gli autori che parlano della città come ideale e ne parlano moltissimo, molto di più che gli storici che lavorano su quel periodo ammettono. Allora, questo è come mai sto lavorando su Cassiodoro, che è uscito come il difensore più eloquente della città. Non importa che sia antica o moderna, torniamo a questo tema. Okay, that's enough Italian of sorts. I'm going to do this in English. You're all comfortable? Interrupt if there are problems. This is my chance for revenge, because so many times I've had to sit and listen to Italian scholars speaking at ridiculous speed. And now I will give you English at ridiculous speed. Strap in, prepare for a ride. As Praetorian prefect, ho messo un po' di dati. As Praetorian prefect to Theodoric's successor, Athalaric, Cassiodorus continued to help compose letters on behalf of the king. Though strictly, this was the role of the quaestor, which he had been before, the position he held under Theodoric. As ever, the voice of the Gothic king is transmuted through the eloquent tones of this third-generation Roman official. Among the letters is one addressed to the province of Bruttium, from which Cassiodorus himself came, from Scylacium, Squillace. Of course, it's in modern Calabria, but it was called Bruttium then. The king writes with distress to urge the inhabitants of the region who are abandoning the city living to return to the joys of urbanity. As often, this isn't in the bit I've quoted, but it's right next to it. As often, Cassiodorus reaches for an image from natural history. Birds, he says, of gentle disposition. Thrushes, storks, and doves love to flock together, while the rapacious hawk seeks solitude. To shun human society is to become suspect, like a rapacious hawk. Farmers, coloni, naturally live on the land they cultivate, but curiales, who enjoy civic honours, ought to live in cities. What is not to like about living in cities, he argues? Who wouldn't enjoy meeting nobles? Qui enim minus grata nobilium videata occursio. Who wouldn't enjoy chatting with their peers? Visiting the forum, practicing honest arts, pursuing their own affairs through the courts, and occasionally playing board games, palamediaci calculi. This was something that immediately caught my attention because I knew I'd met this expression, palamediaci calculi, before. And the answer is in Suetonius. Suetonius wrote an essay on games we play, which includes this expression. I bet you that Cassiodorus knew that essay of Suetonius. He'd read so much. So playing games, going to the baths with their friends, giving dinner parties with lavish reciprocity. As Claude Lepelle showed, this letter is, of course, open to two opposite readings. You can use the letter as evidence of the breakdown of the classical city. The rich landowners are shunning their urban responsibilities, hunkering down in the countryside in their villas. That, of course, is part of the picture of the decline of the ancient city that historians like A.H.M. Jones and Wolf Lieberschutz, in his book terrifyingly entitled The Decline and Fall of the Ancient City, they offer us this picture. But equally striking is the survival of the ideal of urbanism and the willingness of a Gothic king, albeit with heavy prompting from his spokesman Cassiodorus, to support it. Throughout his letters, repeatedly and insistently, Cassiodorus, as a mouthpiece of the Gothic regime, presses the cause of urbanism. The repair of urban fabric, the maintenance of urban institutions and values, the patriotic duties of the citizen, civis, and the ideal which Cassiodorus deserves more credit for entirely reformulating, that of civilitas. And here again, you find in front of you a Suetonian scholar who wrote his first significant article about the way Suetonius invented a concept of civilitas for the emperor. And here I find the same word for an entirely different and equally fascinating concept. I will look at these ideals in more detail in this paper, but first I'd like to do so in the context of a theoretical framework, that of resilience theory, and I hope you can endure this, but when I put in my proposal to the ERC, I was advised by everyone, you need to have a good theoretical basis. This is what they look for. And I thought that resilience theory, which had been very, very little discussed, but particularly by Alan Walmsley, who works on Syria, that resilience theory might help me. And I've been extraordinarily struck that subsequently, everyone's talking about cities and resilience. Perhaps not in resilienza. Cities good. Okay. It's a good theory to work with. Resilience theory comes out of ecology, thence to archaeology, and then urban studies. Resilience looks at the adaptive nature of ecosystems, including the interaction over time between man and the environment. It goes a step beyond transformation in seeing a cycle capable equally of periods of conservation and periods of adaptation, in which change is not gradual but periodic. As Charles Redman, whom I'm citing in this slide, helpfully summarizes it, the cycle between conservation, release when old structures are abandoned, reorganization to cope with new circumstances, exploitation whereby a new social capital is accumulated, leading back to a conservation phase. That's further complicated by two sources of stability or instability: revolt, which disrupts old patterns, and social memory, which draws on old patterns both to conserve and adapt. And I think that's absolutely crucial, the role of social memory for my thesis. From the point of view of my project, the role of social memory is especially interesting, and it's rather different from that form of memory which has been much discussed by Pierre Nora, the Aspens, and others. The question for my project is not whether the ancient city either declined and fell or transformed. That's been the great debate for many years. But given that the ancient city evidently passed through a series of adaptive cycles, how the social memory represented by the ancient city both in its physical forms and its values continued over time to feed into adaptations. And so I see that as a process that continues even in some sense till today. We are still, okay, in Pisa there's only one Roman monument, but the physical presence of the past, but above all the memory that's transmitted through the literature we read, leads to a continuous influence on how we formulate and reformulate our cities. A striking feature of the ancient cities is capacity to provide material for social memory long after the primary phase. This is partly due to the robust consistency of its material remains in the form of urban layout. The streets here will work perfectly well, defensive circuit, communications network where the roads go to, and then its monuments, theatres, amphitheatres, baths, other major structures that remain long visible in the landscape. It's terribly easy, you know, if you grow up in Britain, where there have been many periods at which, bless their hearts, the Anglo-Saxons did their best, but they don't leave much of an impact on the landscape. The Romans always leave a big impact. But it's also bound up with the literary transmission of ideas, the complexity and coherence of the set of values around which the city is built. These, the physical and the literary, tend to impact not in isolation from each other, but as a coherent package, providing a blueprint simultaneously for urban planners and social theorists. And indeed, I started my project from doing battle, in a sense, with the book by Francis Haverfield, who a century ago was a wonderful Roman historian, but who insisted that the great contribution of the Romans to urban planning was the grid pattern. And to me, yes, the Romans did build grids, but the the Roman city is a great deal more than a network of streets. And anyway, they didn't always build grids. Not the least interest of Cassiodorus is that at a moment when the city is evidently under major stress, let's not deny it, 6th century Italy, it's no fun. There have been an awful lot of, perhaps we shouldn't call them barbarians, but people who weren't Romans, who were heavily armed and with a strong tendency to knock cities down, let alone plagues and so on. There's a lot of stress for the whole urban fabric of Italy. But he identifies what the physical realities and the ideals consist in, what he wants to protect. What I want to do is think about the city not just as a phenomenon in the landscape or an architectural blueprint, but as a complex set of ideas about human society, relationships, and values. Cassiodorus is an eloquent spokesman of a set of ideas that doubtless was seen by the players to be under threat, it was, but which, in its articulation, could serve a vital function in the transmission of social memory. Let me start then. Apparently I haven't started yet. That's more of the adaptive cycle. Let me start with Cassiodorus' ideas about urban fabric. One recurrent idea is that the duty of the good citizen is to care about urban fabric, its preservation and enhancement. We first encounter Theodoric urging the citizens of Rome to show their love for the city by paying for building works. The king wants to be encouraged by a display of civic affection to improve the city. Provocandi sumus, affectuosis civium studiis ad augmenta civitatis. You've got to love your city. For nobody can love a place, for no king can love a place if he doesn't understand the inhabitants also care for it. If they pay up, his generosity will be redoubled. And this being Cassiodorus, he urges them to follow the example of nature. The very birds that wander in the sky love their nests. Wandering animals love their dens. And voluptuous fish return to their caverns. To Cassiodorus, civic spirit is not unnatural, a social contract, but part of the very order of nature. And in this he was much helped by Ambrose, who in his Hexameron explores very similar ideas. A little later, I think we're still on the page, Theodoric issues an edict to all Goths and Romans, instructing them to hand over all loose stone available for the repair of city walls. He's probably concerned here with the walls of Rome, but it's expressed as a general principle. City construction is a worthy object of regal care, because the repair of ancient cities is a credit to the age. Laus est temporum reparatio urbium vetustarum. Hence, all should join in willingly. In his anxiety to turn Ravenna into a great capital, Theodoric helped himself to building materials stripped from elsewhere. He has a slightly odd idea of what you should really conserve. That a king sought to burnish his own image is no surprise, but the way Cassiodorus chose to represent it was as a common civic duty. Rome must willingly provide marble from the Domus Pinciana, because it's a sign of the noblest citizen to augment his country. Nobilissimi civis est, patriae suae augmenta cogitare. Similarly, the curiales, this is 2D. Are we still on the page? No, I think I need to... yes. The curiales of an identified city, Estuni, need to understand that sending their marble slabs to Ravenna was a higher good. For it was far better for the material to support the cause of revival ad ornatum surgere redivivum than to lie around as a painful memory of past times, dolore monstrari ex memoria praecedentium saeculorum. Similarly, the curiales of Catania are given a pat on the back for their civic devotion, caritate civica, in repairing civic walls, and given permission to use the material from the collapsed amphitheatre, that's interesting, for repairs. So much is this a matter of principle that Cassiodorus includes in his book of standard model letters, which is book 7, permission to someone offering to take over a ruinous public property for improvement at his own cost. Go on, he urges, and let what lay in ruins through careless antiquity take on a decorous aspect, for it is the mark of a good citizen to ornament his city. Quatenus boni civis est, laudem invenieri meriaris, si faciem tuae civitatis onnaveris. Athalaric is only slightly less insistent than Theodoric on urban improvements. The curiales of Parma get a rocket for failing to clean out their sewers. Very serious. His grandfather Theodoric has provided water by an aqueduct, but the water supply was useless unless the drains were kept clear. I love a man who understands the fundamentals of urban infrastructure. All my experience at Herculaneum is about keeping the drains clear. That's how to protect a city. It's a matter of civic duty. The citizen has no spirit if he is not held by gratitude to his city. Quia civis animum non habet, qui urbis suae gratia non tenetur. The king issues an edict to stop his Gothic officials and soldiers from seizing the property of curiales, the state, the res publica, which the king defends, is not just one city, but all cities. And for each citizen, his own city is the res publica. Uniquique civi urb sua res publica est. So you have a wonderful coincidence between the idea of the state and the patriotic duty to the state and to the city. The state is composed of cities. The citizen then is bound up with the fabric of the city. And Cassiodorus shows us the spectacle of a dynasty constantly attentive to the repair and enhancement of urban fabric, especially in Rome, but generally across Italy. It's remarkable on how many of the principal types of urban monuments they do intervene. There's some priority to defensive walls. We've seen Rome, Catania. Measures were taken to repair the walls of Arles and of Syracuse. I've given the references, where Gildilla, the corrupt count of the city, gets a rocket from Cassiodorus. Cassiodorus loves writing letters of reproof. He gets a rocket for raising a special tax to repair the walls and then failing to repair them but putting the money in his pocket. An almost equally pressing concern are aqueducts and drains. A pair of letters from Theodoric to Argolicus, the city prefect of Rome, and to the Senate announced the dispatch of an agent, Johannes, to sort out water problems. They must repair the splendid drains of Rome, which are a wonder to all who see them and superior to the wonders of other cities. Mommsen hated Cassiodorus' rhetoric, but why not enjoy it? How else do you urge people to do things unless you throw yourself into it and relish the joy of a drain? Splendidas Romanae cloacas civitatis, quae tantum vicentibus conferunt stuporem, ut aliarum civitatum possint miraculos superari. The drains are the best thing in Rome. Not merely a matter of practical hygiene, they're the high point of Roman urbanism. He's not wrong. The next letter, in terms of the impact of the Roman city, it's fascinating how, Haussmann in Paris, the people who sort out London, Bazalgette in London, sorting out of Naples, they all go back to the Romans. They understand getting the drainage right is to make the city healthy and therefore a good place to live. An unhealthy city is not a nice place to live. It simply kills people. The next letter turns to aqueducts, where the problem seems to be that private landowners have illegally been tapping the public water supply to work their mills and to water their vegetable plots. The penalties for doing so will be fierce, as will be for the robbing of metal, the robbing of stone from temples and public buildings for private repairs. Later, we meet an edict addressed to all landowners, though there's a Ravenna, this one, specifically mentioned, on the importance of controlling vegetation around aqueducts. Here's a lovely lesson in gardening. A little sermon follows. It's easy to remove vegetation when it's young, but neglected bushes turn into trees, and then you need an axe to bring them down. The effect of this neglect is devastating. It is a civilis e versio. It is as bad as attack on the city walls with battering rams. By contrast, an aqueduct in good repair provides liquid as pure as that fresh from a spring, and keeps the public baths impressive and swimming pools full of glassy water. So again, his care goes beyond the mere issue of hygiene, and Cassiodorus' admittedly florid prose reminds us that urban amenities are the glory of urban culture. The theme is taken up again, as we've seen, in Athalaric's rebuke to the citizens of Parma. Among aqueducts, the pride of place must obviously go to Rome. It's the duties of the comes formarum. Formae is the standard word for aqueducts in late antiquity. The count of the aqueducts are set out in the Formula 7.6. In the wonders of Rome, beauty and utility come together, and never more so than with the aqueducts. Cassiodorus can give himself the chance here of a fine purple passage on the extraordinary engineering technique of a Roman aqueduct, in which human work competes with nature in terms of durability through centuries, while slipping in a warning on the vital importance of maintenance. One of the joys of my project is to have a colleague who wrote his thesis on the aqueducts of Spain. And of course, he thoroughly appreciates everything that Cassiodorus has to say about the importance of aqueducts and the importance of their maintenance. The Visigoths tried, but not very successfully, to maintain aqueducts in Spain. Walls, water supply, and drains sound like the mere basics of urbanism. But we also find Theodoric concerned with the repair of storage facilities, if you can really call it repair. The patrician Paulinus has undertaken to repair Horia in disrepair through their antiquity, and the king grants him total license to repurpose for his own private use the buildings in a city, in which it is right that all buildings should gleam again, lest ruins spoil the sight of so many splendors of Rome, which is praised on the lips of the whole world. Similarly, Symmachus is praised at great length and ordered a financial subvention into the bargain. Oh, and here's Symmachus for you. This, of course, is the Symmachus whom Theodoric had executed for treason, and here's Cassiodorus publishing a letter of Theodoric to Symmachus and just glossing over the nasty future of their relationship. And he's praised for restoring buildings in Rome and its suburbs, especially the theatre of Pompey. It's not enough for Rome to work, it needs to look good. One phrase in particular catches the eye, or catches my eye. Symmachus is both a diligent imitator of antiquity and a noble institutor of the modern. Antiquorum diligentissimus imitator, modernorum nobilissimus institutor. This thought and this phraseology recurs in several guises in the Varii. It's not simply a matter of repairing and conserving antiquity, but of creating something new and up-to-date. The use of the word modernus is rather significant in my view. It instantly strikes any classicist as a surprising modernism. And indeed, there is no instance of modernus in classical literature. Cassiodorus' language is permeated with the Latin of Cicero and the younger Pliny, but every now and again he uses what we might think of as a neologism, maybe a late Latinism. I prefer to call it a modernism. The formation of the word is completely authentic. Modernus from modo, just as hodiernus from hodie. It's formed well. But in this case, it carries a charge. There can and should be a nobility in the modern. So in praising to the Senate a figure called importunus, where are we here? Importunus, 4a, and elevating him to the patriciate, we hear that his family has decorated the modern age with antique morals, moderni saeculis moribus onabantur moribus. No, I've got that one wrong. Where are we? Moderni saeculis moribus antiquis, obviously. My text has gone crazy. Theodoric is a believer in his modern age as well as in antiquity. When the Curiales of Estuni, who we met before, are ordered to supply building material to Ravenna, they're told that Theodoric's intention is to construct the new and to conserve the old. Nova construere, sed amplius vetusta servare, and to erect the modern without diminution of the previous. Moderna sine priorum imminutione desideramus erigere. Cassiodorus himself, in drafting the formula for the appointment of the palace architect, enjoins on him the duty of both restoring the antique to its original glow and producing new work of similar antiquities. Rather tortured Latin, but he makes his point. Ut et antiqua in nitorem pristinum continuas, et nova simili antiquitate producas. The antique and the modern are antithetical, yet interlinked. The antique should be made new, and the new should be made antique. For this reason, if for no other, I think we should question the recent thesis of Shane Bjornley. And I have to say, the English have had to struggle without a proper translation of Cassiodorus forever. There was a translation by Thomas Hodgkin, who wrote The Invaders of Italy in the 19th century. And he did this thing that wasn't a translation, but a sort of summary come translation, which is quite useful, but you need the proper text. And at last, Shane Bjornley has produced one, publication date, October 2019. A copy of the book arrived on my desk as I left to come here, so the translations are not his, they're mine. And he developed the thesis that Cassiodorus wrote his Varii as a critique of Justinian and his taste for innovation. In my view, neither Cassiodorus nor Theodoric, unless he was misrepresented, are opposed to innovation and modernism. It had to go hand in hand with respect for and restoration of the antique. This seems to me highly relevant to the cycle of resilience. Conservatism, coupled with innovation, is a crucial form of adaptation to changing circumstances. But a city, how are we doing, can't survive on fabric alone. It survives on an idea of urbanism, a set of institutions and values. Cassiodorus, as the voice of the Gothic regime, is quite keen on promoting those institutions and values and just as much as preserving fabric. At the top of his list of priorities is the ruling class of the city, the Curiales. In modern accounts of the late antique city, which represent the city as being in long decline, and of course I'm talking about Wolf Liebeschut's book, The crucial element is supposed to be the decline of the curial system. Under the High Empire, the rich, especially landowners, are supposed to have played a positive role in urban prosperity by voluntarily offering services to their communities in exchange for office and curial status. From the 3rd century onwards, membership of the curia progressively becomes both hereditary and obligatory, and there's an increasing volume of imperial legislation tightening the conditions of obligation of local elite members, as local elite members try to escape their duties by using the imperial service and the church as a way out. At the same time, curials become responsible for tax collection, finding themselves in the curious position of both collecting and paying taxes in the form of local services. And in the picture offered by Jones and Liebeschutz, from the 4th century on, well, really from the 3rd century on, the lot of the curiales became more and more desperate, and it's their loss of faith in the city that causes its decline. 4 centuries is a hell of a long time for a decline, because we find it still going under Visigothic rule in Spain, and in some areas as late as the 8th or even 9th centuries. Another way of looking at it is to register surprise and interest that both Visigothic and Ostrogothic rulers made efforts to extend a system that was potentially unpopular among the rich and potentially dysfunctional. The importance of the curiales to the system of government emerges from the sheer number of letters addressed by Cassiodorus to the curiales of cities across Italy. Formulations vary, sometimes possessores, the landowners, sometimes to defensores, but always the curiales, they're always there. This is simply how to get things done in cities, even if they have governors, which they did, comites, who could be Gothic. The letters make clear that the government wishes to cherish and support the curiales. In the 5th century, the Emperor Majorian described the curiales as the sinews of the commonwealth and the innards of the cities. I love this metaphorical language. Nervos rei publicae ac viscera civitatum. Jones cites that from Majorian, but oddly enough fails to cite the way that Cassiodorus echoes him precisely. An edict of Athalaric is eloquent. It protests against the outrageous abuse of the curiales. O nefastum scelus, o importabili malum. Importabilis is another Cassiodorian neologism, a modernism. You don't find it in classical Latin, but he's very fond of the word, importabilis. Any offender will be fined 10 pounds of gold or flogged. The curiales are urged to raise their spirits. E rigidi colla depressi, poor old depressed curials. They should live in a polity characterized by concord, like that of the cranes, described by natural historians. And here definitely he's using Ambrose's Hexameron, and Ambrose too uses this word politia, which of course is not normally a Latin word. Not in vain did antiquity call the curiales the lesser senate, the sinews and innards of the city, nervos quoque vocitans, ac viscera civitatum. Cassiodorus is citing Majorian. Cassiodorus knew his legal Latin inside out. He'd read every single imperial rescript and he had them at his fingertips. That's his job. In calling Majorian antiquitas, he attributes even greater prestige to the idea. You know, how antique is an emperor from 1 century before, less than 1 century before. In a closely comparable context, Cassiodorus sets out in one of his formulae the exceptional circumstances in which a praetorian prefect can order the sale of lands belonging to a curialis. Antiquity has prudently defined that the property of curiales should not be broken up easily, By whom can the orbium munia, the services of cities, be sustained, if the sinews of the cities, civitatum nervi, are cut off? Again, there's I won't quote it, Theodoric to Bishop Guldilla. The overwhelming tone of Cassiodorus' letters about curiales is protective. The formula for the Praetorian prefect, I've zoomed ahead. Here we are. The formula for the Praetorian prefect attributes to him powers beyond those of any other government officer. He alone may flog the curiales, who are defined by law as the lesser senate. Libanius had vociferously protested against the flogging of the curiales in 4th century Antioch. And here, the power to flog them is still restricted and exceptional. In several letters, the curiales are seen as relatively small property owners who stand in danger of exploitation by big landowners and their tax evasion. Theodoric writes the Senate to reprove senators for failure to pay taxes and thus land the curiales in debt. A vivid illustration of 5G, of a curial family which could no longer afford to carry out its duties concerns the family of a lady called Agenantia. Athalaric writes to his Praetorian prefect, giving him permission to remove Agenantia and the family from the album of curiales in Lucania. Such a proceeding is exceptional because the most sacred laws have tied the curiales to their duties, unless and only if released by emperors. They will now, and it's very constantly, Theodoric behaves as if he's simply the successor to the emperors, though he never takes the title of emperor. They will now be reduced to the condition of possessores, landowners, not in the curia, and learn what it's like to be on the other side and suffer all the difficulties which they've been used to imposing on others. In raising the prospect of the hatred against curiales as tax collectors, the letter echoes that bitter epigram of Salvian, writing in Gaul a century before, quod curiales tot tyranni. If Cassiodorus is protective of the curiales as the minor senatus of the civitates, it goes without saying that he was positive about the Roman Senate, to which he and his father before him belonged. As the first, it is Cassiodorus Senator. As the first letter of the collection proclaims, from Theodoric to the Emperor Anastasius, they are bound together by a shared vision of a unified Roman empire and by the love of Rome, veneranda Romanae urbis adfectio. Numerous letters to the Senate lay it on thick about the reverence due to that body. However, problems arise when there is rioting in the circus. Theodoric is a little worried whether he ought to be concerning himself with spectacula, just, of course, as Marcus Aurelius, in exchange with Fronter, worried and concluded spectacula are really important. He calls on the patricians Albinus and Avienus to adjudicate which of two competing pantomimes should be the official pantomime of the Greens. You may think I'm obsessed with pantomimes, but it's not my obsession, it's a Roman obsession, and it lasted for 5 centuries and more. This fails to settle the dispute, and shortly afterwards we meet a letter, 5b, about a row between supporters of the Greens and the senators Theodorus and Importunus, we've met him already, resulting in the death of a supporter. It seems they've responded to insulting chants by sending in armed men against those for whom they should feel citizenly affection, civicus adfectus. It's one thing for a senator to respond to an insult from a passing man in the street. It's not a good idea to insult senators. But mockery at the games, that's different. It's traditional and acceptable. This is then followed up by a string of really rather angry letters. Theodoric tells the Senate, if anyone's servant kills a free-born citizen and ingenuous, he is to hand him over at once to justice or incur a fine of 10 pounds of gold and the king's displeasure. The next letter is addressed to Populus Romanus and urges that spectacles should be an occasion of sweet music, not discord. Romana sit vox plebis. Senators must not be insulted. So don't insult the senators. The senators don't go and kill the Populus Romanus. The next is a lecture to the city prefect, Agapitus, on the proper relations of senate and plebs. The tradition of popular insults has to be kept under control. And if any senator forgets the rules of civility and has a freeborn citizen killed, he is to be punished. Si vero senato civilitatis imemor, quemquam ingenuum, nefaria fecit caede vexari, and he is to be punished. So civilitas is a relationship between citizens who, even if they're senators and plebs, are nevertheless fellow cives. Perhaps the most revealing letter, there it was, with a nice horse. Perhaps the most revealing letter about the plebs is one written by Cassiodorus as Praetorian prefect on the issue of food distributions, opsonia for the Roman people. The official in charge of the distributions must ensure that regal benefactions should not be polluted like clear water polluted with mud by corrupt agents. All fraud is serious, but fraud against the Roman people is intolerable, importabilis. There he goes again. The people should receive the full amount granted and be kept happy. Nor should benefit fraudsters be allowed. The grant is aimed at full Roman citizens, quirites, using very traditional language here. Nobody of servile condition should sneak into the place of the freeborn, non subripiat locum liberi fortuna servilis. For it's an offence against the majesty of the Roman people if the purity of its blood is contaminated by the company of slaves. As Cassiodorus was doubtless well aware, Augustus used very similar words about purity and contamination to limit access to the corn dole. Cassiodorus and his Gothic masters thus offer us a surprisingly traditional image of the SPQR. Both Senate and people matter. The gulf between free citizen and slave matters. For a senator to use his slave to kill a citizen is not acceptable. It's an offence against civilitas. And it's to this idea of civilitas, which represents the most coherent and extensive bundle of values in Cassiodorus, that lies at the heart of his thought about cities and citizenship. Everyone who writes about Cassiodorus is conscious of the importance of this ideal. You could scarcely avoid it, because the word cluster, civilis, civilitas, incivilitas, recurs with an astonishing frequency and in a wide range of contexts. Some people think that the concept is so vague as to be almost meaningless. So Jim O'Donnell, in his study, this is quite a long time ago, in the 1980s, of Cassiodorus, passes over the idea with some distaste. He refuses to discuss it. Quote, civilitas is in fact part of a larger scheme of slogans that springs from the whole system of denatured language with which Cassiodorus loaded the varii. He goes on to describe the slogan as linguistic spinelessness. Whence this hostility springs, I really don't understand. What's he got against civilitas? I want to make a case for civilitas as a form of social memory in changed circumstances of Roman ideals adapting to the new realities of Gothic occupation. First point to make is that Cassiodorus' use of the term is strikingly non-classical. The root sense of civilis is what takes place between citizens. Above all, the great opposites, civil law, ius civile, and civil war, bellum civile. However, as I discovered when I was writing my thesis on Suetonius, in the early empire it acquires a new meaning as the behavior of an emperor who, despite apparently kingly status, continues to behave like a fellow citizen. Suetonius, in his Life of Augustus, is the first to coin this as a virtue, civilitas. By the time we get to Cassiodorus, there's a whole new range of meanings, referring to the highest values of civility and civilization. And it's actually quite hard to express civilization in Latin until Cassiodorus has given us civilitas. This usage is not encountered in earlier writers. So Sidonius Apollinaris uses the word, but not in the Cassiodorian sense. But it's found in both Cassiodorus and his contemporary Ennodius, the Bishop of Pavia and panegyrist of Theodoric, and I've given you some passages of Ennodius's panegyric where he talks about Theodoric's civilitas. Whether Theodoric himself encouraged the use of the word, we can't possibly say. How does panegyric work? Does someone say, I want you to praise me for this? Or does everyone understand this is what it's all about? The point is, it's a word that has special relevance to Ostrogothic Italy. It's a word cluster that applies to human relations between citizen and citizen, but also, crucially, between Roman citizen and Goth. Central to it is the rule of law, jus civile, and its opposite is the use of violence. Thus, as we've seen, a senator who sends armed slaves against the Roman plebs is civilitatis immemor. This is simply not how citizens should treat each other. In the half-dozen letters that concern circus riots, civilitas is invoked in each and every one of them. The use of violence by senators to defend their honor is simply incompatible with behavior between fellow citizens. The Senate should know it, because the Senate is ipsam civilitatis sedem, the seat of civility. Particularly instructive is Athalaric's general edict. Word has reached his ear of whispering sussurrationes that certain parties despise civilitas and choose to live with the savagery of beasts. Until returning to rustic origins, they regard human law as bestially odious. Civility thus maps onto the developmental scheme, very classical developmental scheme, by which man distinguishes himself from the beasts by living in cities under the law. Athalaric emphasizes that all must live by the law, even those close to the royal family. And he's probably thinking of his cousin Theodahad, who didn't behave himself very well, but became king even so. They too must go through the courts and accept their judgments. First on his list of some 10 items is illegal seizure of property, sub qua nec dici potest civilitas nec haberi. He then throws in breaking up the marriages of others, bigamy, extorting corrupt payments, magic, and the physical abuse of the poor. It's an extraordinary mixture, but the clear central theme is the rule of the law. The following letter addresses the Senate on the rule of law, jus civile, and wishes the king's own civility to be recognized, nostra civilitate recognita. Civilitas covers the proper treatment within the law, without violence or bestiality, of several groups of people. One notable group is the Jews. No less than 5 letters concern synagogues in Genoa, Rome, and Milan. The first of the Jews of Genoa gives permission to preserve an ancient building by re-roofing. The next reinforces all ancient legislation for the protection of the Jews. Improving thoughts are offered on how the protection of laws is the proof of civility. Custodia legum civilitatis est indicium. For this is what sets apart civilized man from beasts. Hoc enim populos ab agresti vita in humanae conversationis regulam congregavit, haec ratio a feritate divisit. The Jews are permitted to use existing statutes so far as compatible with civility, quatinus quod ad civilitatis usum constant esse repertum. The threat to civility is real. A few letters later, we hear that there's been rioting in Rome and the synagogue was burnt down. If anyone has complaints to bring against the Jews, they should bring them to the Senate. But Theodoric wants everyone to live together peacefully, placatis moribus. Along similar lines is a letter to the Jews of Milan, who have complained about physical assault and violence and have invoked the king's protection, his tuitio. Theodoric agrees to protect civility, pro servanda civilitate, though he does observe that the Jews themselves must do nothing inciviliter. It applies to everyone. Thus, civility is not merely a matter of proper relations between Roman citizens under Roman law, though that idea is central, but it's elevated into a general virtue of civilized life that distinguishes men from beasts. Hence, and this is what makes the idea so interesting, it applies to relations between Romans and Goths. The stock in trade of a Goth is violence. They're soldiers, and their virtue is what protects, if you can call it protecting, Italy, The mafia protect people do. But that violence is not to be turned against the unarmed civilian population. The contrast between Roman civility and barbarism is spelt out most clearly in a series of letters regarding the government of two recently acquired provinces, Gaul and Pannonia. Theodoric addresses the provincials of Gaul, this is 8a. They must learn to return after a long interval to Roman ways. They have been restored to antiqua libertas with moribus togatis, so they must put off barbarity and mental cruelty, exuiti barbariem, abiciti mentium crudalitatem. And remember, this is written by a man, for a man, who we might be tempted to call a barbarian. But barbarity is... Theodoric is no barbarian. He's highly civilized. He is Mr. Civilitas. They must learn to live like settled people under the random barbarians. Gentilitas enim vivit ad libitum. Gentilitas is a nice word for barbarians. He has sent them a governor to restore civil rule, civilem regulam. The following letter addresses all barbarians and Romans in Pannonia. It's a little more explicit about what barbarians mean, but what barbarian ways mean. Why, Theodoric asks, do they keep reverting to dueling, monomachia? They're like a load of German students. Will they believe that there is now peace if people fight in times of civility? Si sub civilitate pugnator. They must learn to imitate the Goths, but the Pannonians aren't Goths. They must learn to imitate the Goths who know how to fight externally, but to behave modestly internally. So the Goths are civil. It was evidently a struggle to contain not only the violent urges of the Gothic rank and file, but to get those promoted to high positions to behave themselves. We've already seen the letter in which Athalaric takes to task his governor of Syracuse, the Goth Gildilla, for pocketing the money raised for repairing city walls. But he's also, Gildilla is a real villain, he's been interfering in the judicial process and calling to his court arguments between Romans over which he had no jurisdiction. He's told in no uncertain terms to back off and recognize that the Goths were there as a defense force, not as judges. You defend the laws with arms and leave the Romans to litigate in peace. For the glory of the Goth is the protection of civility. Extraordinary expression he uses. Gothorum laus est, civilitas custodita. What then can we learn from Cassiodorus' obsessive invocation of civilitas? One approach, such as recently that of Sean Bjornley, is to see Cassiodorus as conducting a defense of the Gothic Amal regime and the collaboration of Romans like himself with the regime, addressed after the invasion of Belisarius to the court at Constantinople. To me, a more convincing audience, given the language, is nobody in Constantinople but the Senate and the Curiales of Rome and Italy. Either way, Cassiodorus is surely representing the Ostrogoths as ruling according to the principles approved of by Roman tradition, like civilitas. A more helpful approach, it seems to me, and one that doesn't involve postulating hypothetical audiences. I get terribly frustrated when people say, for whom was this poem written? First you create an imaginary audience, and then you interpret the poem in the light of the audience which you have inferred from the poem itself. It's a completely circular process. Let's stop hypothesizing audiences. I prefer to invoke resilience theory. The Gothic invasions represent a major trauma to the system. Roman urbanism, Roman law, and Roman practice is under threat. An ecological trauma leads to adaptation supported by social memory. Cassiodorus draws constantly on the memory bank represented by antiquitas in an attempt to rebuild the old urban system, or rather to assist the new masters of Rome to do so. But it's essential not to reject the new realities. Gothic rule is the new modernity, which is why respect for antiquity always goes hand in hand with praise of modernity. To reject modernity is to reject Gothic rule. And one way we can observe this process of adaptation is in changes in the Latin language. Far from linguistic spinelessness, as O'Donnell called it, Cassiodorus adapts. Civilitas is an old and recognizable word. He probably was absolutely as aware as I am of its importance in Suetonius, and aware that to attribute civilitas to a ruler was the best thing you could do. But in new circumstances, it acquires a new meaning. It's all about sustaining civil rule and civil law in the midst of barbarity, barbaries. For Augustus, the opposite of civilitas was superbia, the arrogance of an Oriental king. For Theodoric, the opposite is the violence always simmering beneath the surface in an Italy full of armed Goths amidst an unarmed civilian population. In a word, it's under the impact of barbarian invasion that Latin invents a new word for civilization. Urbanism is more than the physical and institutional structures of the city. It's a way of thought. What Cassiodorus does is to spell out in considerable detail such a way of thought, whether in terms of fabric or institutions and ideals. He spells it out for the benefit of the barbarian kings for whom he acts as mouthpiece. And the very fact that Cassiodorus spelt it out and that the varii were read meant that he contributed to social memory, the memory on which future generations could draw. He offered an urbanism that was not mere antiquarianism, but a recipe for modernity. And I was delighted, giving a slightly different paper on Cassiodorus in Rome, to be told by someone who's working on the Roman Senate in the 12th century AD, obviously, that Cassiodorus is explicitly cited in their discussions of restoration of the urban fabric. Potete fare domande anche in italiano.
Grazie professore, ho apprezzato moltissimo questa questo percorso che lei ha costruito intorno alla città antica e poi intorno a questa idea di civilitas che in qualche modo è uno degli elementi che dominano tutta l'opera di Cassiodoro, che appunto si estende per più di 30 anni, quindi è molto interessante. E forse rimarcherei
Lei è membro del gruppo di Giardine?
Sì,
di nome?
Oppedisano.
Sì.
E appunto forse rimarcherei un aspetto, cioè il fatto che è banale.
È un nome molto rilevante al mio tema, no?
Sì.
Oppidum.
Sì, oppidum, certo. Il fatto che tutto quello che scrive Cassiodoro, a meno che non accettiamo appunto l'ipotesi di Bjornli, che secondo me non è da accettare, l'ipotesi di fondo che le varie siano state riscritte a Costantinopoli per un'altra audience, appunto. Le varie sono state scritte in qualche modo interpretando una linea politica, che è quella della regalità ostrogota. E quindi forse in questa così battente insistenza sull'idea di civilitas c'è anche una strategia da parte del governo ostrogoto, oltre che una resilienza da parte di un contesto culturale che in qualche modo reagisce ad una frattura importante, che è quella appunto del 476 di Odoacre e poi del 493. E questa strategia che non è soltanto retorica, ovviamente, da parte degli Amali, da parte della legalità ostrogota, ha dei riflessi anche sulla prima parte, insomma, dei documenti che lei ha messo a fuoco, cioè quelli che riguardano in qualche modo la politica edilizia del regime. È interessante qui vedere come ci sia in qualche modo, come l'archeologia un po' aiuti a notare che c'è in qualche modo una differenza abbastanza marcata tra gli interventi che la monarchia compie nell'Italia settentrionale, quella che un tempo era l'Italia annonaria, rispetto all'Italia, quella che fino al V secolo era l'Italia suburbicaria, diciamo così. Perché nell'Italia settentrionale, soprattutto a Ravenna, sono interventi più massicci di trasformazione proprio del profilo delle città, mentre a Roma e nell'Italia meridionale sono interventi che anche appunto così l'evidenza archeologica rileva in modo molto più debole. E qui secondo me c'è uno dei tanti aspetti che in qualche modo rientrano nel tema della civilitas, cioè il fatto che la regalità ostrogota, nel momento in cui arriva in Italia e deve governare appunto una maggioranza romana, una schiacciante maggioranza romana, in qualche modo accetta una serie di cedimenti nei confronti della classe dirigente romana, in particolare del Senato, e non interferisce anche nell'apparato simbolico delle città, nel volto degli spazi, nell'aspetto materiale dei luoghi. Insomma, quindi questo è un aspetto che dovrebbe in qualche modo confortare poi quello che lei ha detto. Una seconda notazione riguarda appunto, quando lei parlava della frantumazione o comunque della disgregazione delle curie e degli organismi politici locali. È quella lettera in cui il prefetto al pretorio interviene sull'albo municipale è molto significativa, perché era un'operazione che un tempo faceva il governatore provinciale, e invece ormai nel VI secolo la fa il prefetto al pretorio. E questo un po' è il segno di una difficoltà nel rapporto tra il centro e la periferia, perché il rapporto tra il centro e la periferia non è più mediato dalla provincia, ma la città risponde direttamente al potere centrale, in questo caso al prefetto al pretorio. E chiaramente è un rapporto che diventa molto più difficile in questa prospettiva.
Grazie. In un certo senso si sono trovati intrappolati, no? Perché se costituisce una classe che dipende dalle famiglie che loro e i figli dei figli, nipoti, devono rimanere per sempre nella stessa posizione. Biologicamente non è possibile. Noi umani non ci sostituisciamo così generazione dopo generazione. Prima o poi la situazione economica per qualsiasi famiglia si cambia. E questa insistenza che i nipoti dei curiales devono rimanere nipoti non è il crollo della città antica, è semplicemente rivela l'assurdità della legge imperiale che dice no, siete fissati in certe posizioni sociali. Una flessibilità è assolutamente necessaria. E anche per questo motivo a me sembra molto difficile di prendere queste evidenze come la lettera di Cassiodoro e anche Salviano per dimostrare un declino generale. No, era un effetto di un certo tipo di sistema che miracolosamente è sopravvissuto per secoli, nonostante tutti i problemi coinvolti, e che è un sistema che Aristotele non avrebbe mai potuto riconoscere come una polis genuina. Questa insistenza che certe famiglie devono essere bugliautai per sempre, per tutte le generazioni, non c'entra negli schemi di Aristotele. Allora abbiamo un fenomeno molto tardo-antico che secondo me stranamente è sopravvissuto quando non era neanche necessario. Ma io prendo la posizione, come avete, assolutamente contraria a quella di Liebeschutz. Cassiodoro ha parlato tanto, con tanta eloquenza, che siamo rimasti senza parole.
No, è che gli esperti di Cassiodoro non abbondano.
Non abbiate paura. Erigete cose.
Se non ci sono altre domande,
Mi
allora
vogliono lasciare in
ringraziamo
pace.
il professor Wallace-Hadrill per queste 2 splendide lezioni e insomma speriamo di rivederlo presto a Pisa. Grazie ancora.
Grazie.